How do you react when you see video settings screens like these?
I don't know what to pick.
Fear no more! We will go through most of the possible video settings one by one and then discuss which are the best ones to choose in what situation. What do all those settings even mean, and what impact do they have on your production and on your image quality? I'm making a new project here in my video editing software. I've chosen Adobe Premiere, but the settings that you can choose from are basically the same in every program. They all do the same thing. Thing is, you have to choose some video settings when you make your video editing software project, and even before you start animating, you need to tell your animation software a couple of things about the image quality that you're aiming at. Most video editing software, if you start a project, you already have to decide on where you want to save everything, and it will offer us to choose from a list of presets. And you see there are a lot of presets. And the problem is all those presets are made for the output of camera. The problem with live action is that they have to do a lot of work around to make the cameras record in an okay speed, and they're not giving the full image quality at any point. But in animation you can have the full image quality at any given point, but we will talk about that more later on. Let's make our own preset. I'm here in the settings screen in Premiere where I can put in not all, but most of the settings that will affect my image quality. And the first thing we can set up is the frame rate. And you might think, this is easy, I just have to choose at which speed my film is running, but actually this is already a pretty complex topic. As you can see, there are quite a lot of different frame rates to choose from. And the reason why there are so many of them is because filmmaking grew over many years, and during the early days of digital film they had to struggle with a lot of technical limitations. One of them was the power supply. The power network set the speed at which the light in the television could draw the picture. And that's why different countries have different frame rates. European television PAL has 25 frames per second and the American one has 29.97, which is, as you can imagine, for animation really annoying, because you don't have point something frames on your timeline, you only have full frames. 24 frames per second is the classic frame rate in cinema, and for animation it's my favorite frame rate because it doesn't have point something. 24 frames are a second and 12 frames are half a second. So it's easy to grasp a mind around what happens at what frame. And it's also related to the number 8, which is also always great to have in your animation timing. We have an article about that on Animator Island. So I really love 24 frames per second for animation. Just in case you're wondering, I see cinema films in television, how do they go into different frame rates? And maybe you have the question, if I animate in a different frame rate, can I just export it into another frame rate? Well, yes and no. The problem is that this always has to be done with a workaround. And in case of PAL, there's actually a pretty easy one. They just speed up the film. They play what would play with 24 frames per second with 25 frames per second. And if you actually compare PAL DVDs with the cinema version, you will see that they did just that. They sped up the film, which also changes the audio pitch and makes the TV version slightly higher pitched and also shorter. It's a little trickier with the 29.97 frames in NTSC. They're using a trick that's called 3-2 pull down that has something to do with blending over extra frames. You can look that up on Wikipedia if it interests you. So if your film will be mostly shown on television and you want to make sure that you judged all the timings correctly for that, you would probably animate in 30 frames per second. And if you want it to look absolutely perfect in cinema, you should probably animate in 24 frames per second. Produce for what it will be used for the most. The next one in the list is the dimensions of your pictures. Nowadays, HD is standard, but as you know, these things change every couple of years. So at the moment, you are super safe with HD. Even if you produce for television, you should consider producing in HD, because you never know if you will show your film in cinema. You never know if you will maybe go to festivals or if you will have a YouTube version. Always choose the biggest image quality you are aiming at, because you cannot blow up a picture after you choose a smaller image dimension. So the next one in our list is aspect ratios, and this is another one that is just there for historical reasons, unfortunately still being used in live action footage. But the reason why we have this is in the early days of television, you might remember it, we all had those squarish televisions. It was an aspect ratio called 4:3. But after a while, widescreen films were getting more and more popular, and people wanted to see widescreen films in their home. They still had the same video standard. Even if the first widescreen televisions came out, they still were sending in 4:3. There are two ways to make a widescreen picture out of 4:3. One way would be to put in black bars at the top and the bottom of your screen. The problem is that this way you lose pixels. You have pixel rows that are completely black. Your image is smaller. So another solution they found to have a little better image quality was to say, okay, we have this 4:3 picture, and we use every pixel of this 4:3 picture that we have. You just say that every pixel from now on is a little wider than it really is. And that's the trick that they used to make widescreen pictures in the PAL standard. Yeah, you can see this pixel aspect ratio here. That's for PAL, that's this one. One pixel is 1 to 1.4. It's wider than a normal pixel. Actually, they still decrease this image quality because you obviously you are missing some pixels compared to square pixels. What you do with square pixels, you really add more pixels, that give you a widescreen image. And that's what we need, that's what we do for animation, to have the full pixel count, the full image resolution. So let's continue with another dinosaur from the early ages of television. Back then, the best they could do was a light beam that would draw the picture. The problem is that this light beam wasn't fast enough to draw the whole resolution without you noticing a huge flickering. But they realized that the light beam is able to draw every other line and then fill out the remaining lines. If you had PAL at 25 frames per second film, the light beam would actually draw at double speed. It would go at 50 half frames per second. So you might have seen that in scrolling texts on all televisions. One half picture might be in a already scrolled further in the next half picture, and this would have the effect that you can't read the text because it would be distorted in lines. So the trend nowadays goes to project the whole picture at any moment, although all televisions still understand half pictures. Now, so for animation, you would put it on no fields, which is also called progressive. And upper field and lower first would just tell your television with which line to start first. By the way, there is a revision for the DVD standard. DVDs nowadays, at least the newer DVD players, also understand progressive pictures. So one of the settings that's actually not in here right now, because it's something that Premiere just picks up from the pictures that you throw into it, is the color and the color space. This is something that is more important for your animation software and how you export your pictures from them. Especially if you do a lot of color correction, you need to know about bit depths. Now, to demonstrate this, I prepared a little nice trippy gradient over here for you. Those are two seemingly identical files. This is the one in 8-bit and this is the one in 16-bit. 8-bit is the usual. 8-bit is what you usually see on your computer screen. And it's usually enough for all your end formats. You know, if you send something to YouTube or on a DVD, it's 8-bit. But I'll show you why you would choose a higher bit rate during production if you do a lot of color correction. Because if we take this image here and we go into the levels, which is basically just a diagram of all the color values that you have in your image. And now we will go and squeeze those color values together, like this. You know, all this is now squashed together on this little space. Let's do the same with the 8-bit image. And we got a great picture in both cases. If we now stretch the color values that we just squeezed together, let's see what happens. See, this is the color values squeezed together, and we will just stretch them to fill up our entire image again. You see that we have this banding in the gradient, but if we do that here, it almost looks like what we had in the beginning. The 16-bit had so many color values that actually reducing it on this little space still had enough values to contain our complete gradient. See the difference? 8-bit, 16-bit. And if you do a lot of color correction in an 8-bit image, after a while you will get a color banding like this. And in 16-bit it takes a whole lot to show any color banding. And even then, you can even go higher. There's 32 bits. And by the way, the bit depth that I tell you is meant per color channel, making 24 bits in total. And for 16-bit, that's 48-bit. You know, sometimes in some softwares you can select 24 bits, in some software you can select 8 bits, and they mean the same thing. Of course, during the time of animation, this is not so important, but if you go into compositing and you have a 3D film with a lot of textures and, you know, a lot of, like, light is very important, and the contrast is very important and has very many nuances that you want to convey. Once you're done with all your color correction, you can leave it in 8-bit. But before you did that, and those nuances are important to you, stay in 16-bit. Let's just have a short glance at sound. I'm not an expert for that in any way. I just leave it on 48 Hertz, which is okay for everyday purposes. I know that studios work on 96 Hertz, and but if you have a musician, he will probably know all about this and give you the proper files. Just don't go under 44.1 kilohertz, because you can definitely hear the sound quality degrading from there on. Yeah, and this is everything that we have to fill out in Premiere before we can start our video editing project. If you put in something in a video editing software that doesn't fit those settings, it will try to convert it, but this will lead often to a decrease of quality. You know, obviously if you exported a smaller size and you have a bigger size here, it will blow it up. But this will show pixel, this will make the picture more blurry. If you have mismatching frame rates, it will try to get the missing frames from somewhere. It will try to convert it through, you know, half pictures and stuff, but this might mess up a snappy timing, or it might lead to blurred pictures. So just double check that all your settings are the same, because, you know, you would have to re-render stuff, or in the worst case, animate something over again. Two more terms that we have to get out of the way to talk about all of this in total is video codecs and containers. We'll find them in the export settings. As soon as you want to put a video out or an image out, you have to choose what format it is in. And the formats actually are the container for a video. Like you have an AV container over here or a QuickTime MOV. But this is just, you just have to imagine this is like a bottle. You don't know yet what's in the bottle. It's just, you know, it's just a container, just what the name says. So you choose that. Let's actually do that in QuickTime because they have a whole bunch of codecs to choose from. And this is the setting for how the images in this container will be compressed. And you use compressions obviously to have smaller file sizes, you know, to be able to put them on a DVD that only has a limited disk space, or to be able to send it to YouTube. There are many different video compressions, and some of them work very differently, but you know, they all have something mutual. They don't save every frame anymore. They most of them look what is different. Like, you know, if I stay absolutely still and I only move my arm and my hand, the video codec will not save the image information for the background behind me that was still. It will only save the area where I moved my hand. So the codecs only look for what is different between the pictures. During production, you try to avoid codecs. You always lose image quality if you compress. This is just to explain the terms. We will talk about what exactly to choose in a minute. And if you simplify it, there are only like two very different cases from each other. The first case is your master format. This is the highest image quality that you're aiming at. The second case is if you actually want to have low quality versions of that master format. Your master format is usually connected to what your biggest, most high quality picture is that you want to have in the end. For example, if you produce something for cinema, you know that you want it to be at least HD, you know that your frame rate is 24 frames per second, and you stick to that during your entire production. You don't have anything that has anything to do with your final picture that's ever smaller than HD, or that ever has a frame rate different from 24 frames per second. You try to avoid that, because in your final picture you need this high quality to look good on the big screen. Now during production you might actually even choose formats that have a better or higher image quality than your master format. One example was the color correction. You know, if you know that those nuances in your picture are very important to you, you export from your animation software in 16 bits. Then you do your color correction in 16 bits in a compositing software. And from then you can go down to 8 bits. So, master format, highest image quality that you're aiming at. But what formats are actually good to use for your master formats? Some people like uncompressed AVs and uncompressed QuickTime MOVs. And you just find that when you go to AVI and you switch the codec to non or something like this. The advantage of making a movie file is that you only have one file and it's relatively uncompressed. The problem with that is that the formats are a little lying to you. I think you are limited to a certain color spaces in AVs and MOVs, but you should look that up if you choose that. What I prefer to that is actually to have image sequences for your master format during the production, and maybe even to archive your film. The advantage of image sequences is that you can replace single images. If you see, like, for example, frame 120 to 130 have render errors in it, you can just render those 10 frames again. You don't need to export your whole sequence again. You can only replace the images. Now, what I can recommend for image sequences is TIFF, TGA, or PNG. PNG actually is already compressed a little, but it's supposedly a lossless compression. I like to use it for my own amateur hobby projects, where I'm limited to the disk space that I have. So the reason why I should use TIFF or TGA is because they are really not compressed at all. If they are compressed, they have a data compression, but they have not an image compression. They have, every pixel is in there with color informations, and you need to have that if you play around with the picture. Only this gives you the highest optimal image quality. And for all the image formats that I mentioned, they can contain an alpha channel. So if you export, for example, a character without the background and you want to composite that together in your compositing software, those formats are great for doing that. And TIFF can actually not only contain 16-bit color, but even 32. For sound, there's a similar case. During your production, you don't want to compress anything because, compression will be audible, especially if you compress a compressed file again. So all your sound files should be in a high-quality WAV or IF. I don't know how you say those in English. For most of those files, except for PNG, they are huge. You need to have enough disk space. I think one TIFF frame of one of my films was 7 megabyte big in HD. And now, if you calculate that for a whole minute, you have a lot. So yeah, these are only suggestions what you can use for your master formats. Of course, that needs to be decided on a case-by-case basis. Maybe HD is not enough. Maybe you have a 4K film, then you definitely need to double your screen resolution. Or, if you do something in an unusual format, there even are some experiments nowadays with higher frame rates than 30 frames per second. For example, Peter Jackson did his Hobbit in 48 frames per second. And there's a lot of stuff to experiment there. If you go into special cases, you need to think at the beginning, before you start animate, what that means for your master format and what is the highest possible image quality that you still want to have in the end. Okay, now let's talk about the case real quick where you want image quality to decrease because you want a smaller file. During your production, that really only happens for if you want to have a preview of your film. For example, if you want to send the current state of your shot to a director via email. You don't want him to send an uncompressed TGA image sequence that he cannot even play fluently on his computer. Then the other case is at the end of your production, when you go to DVD, YouTube, and Blu-ray, those formats only have a certain data rate that they can play to play it fluently. For image sequences, for example, for play blasts, you could choose JPEGs, and JPEGs really reduce the file size of your image, but you might have already seen that if you put down the quality, it will show drastically, it would show very quickly. But for a play blast, to see if your animation works, this might be okay. Or even, I already mentioned PNG for a master format. It's, it has a very high quality, but it's not as big as a TIFF or a TGA. Let's have a look at another current standard that's used everywhere. It's H.264, and it's actually an end format that's used in the Blu-ray standard and in the internet a lot. YouTube, for example, encodes everything in H.264, and it's just a very, very effective compressor. And yeah, just so you see what inputs you can give for a final image export, one of the things that wasn't so much an issue before is the bit rate of your images for the compressor. Most of it is measured in megabits per second, and this is the amount of values that you're allowed to pass in 1 second. If you reduce that value, if you let less bits through per second, less colors will go through, less individual small details will go through, the sound quality will decrease. Yeah, just so you have some numbers, DVD quality is at 9 megabits per second at most. Blu-ray quality is at least 20 megabits per second, and in the internet, you choose anything really that's good for your distribution platform. I think on YouTube let's check that real quick for HD. That's a good thing. A lot of video editing software have presets you see here for Vimeo and YouTube. Now it's a good time to use presets because they usually researched what those platforms like to take. And if you see the 1080p, P means progressive, the full picture, you know, we had that in the beginning. And they have a bitrate of 8 megabits per second. Then another codec you should probably hear of is MPEG-2, which has been used in the DVD standard. It's not as effective as H.264, but if you make a DVD, the DVD file needs to be in MPEG-2. And then another thing, just so you have heard of it, in digital cinema, nowadays they're using DCPs, digital cinema packages. And yeah, those are codecs. I think they use a JPEG codec to compress. This is the format that you need if you send your film to a festival or, you know, to a cinema where it will be screened. Whew, so that was quite something. That was complex and complicated. And I compliment you for staying with me all the way through the jungle of video editing settings. You should get a medal, like, you know, for patience and stuff. And I hope I could at least give you some guidelines about what to think and how to think when choosing video editing settings. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. I will try my best to answer them. Or maybe you have your own methods and your own workflow that you would like to share with us. I would really appreciate to read about this. Of course, as always, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much for staying with me all the way to the end.